Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you happen to be watching this. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I also hope to see you in class the next class period. Before I get on too far, I want to go through the standard disclaimer that's going to be in almost every one of these slideshows. Number one, I'm not a professional YouTuber. You may hear my wife screaming at me in the middle of this presentation. You may hear snowplows. You may hear the neighbors' dogs barking. You may hear me gasp when my cat jumps on my lap unexpectedly. I'm not a professional YouTuber. I'm using this to get information out to my students who can't attend class. And second, all the borrowed images, all the quoted text are being used for educational purposes. I'm not monetizing anything. I am not a professional YouTuber. Let's start with the basics for Comp 104. And the basics are going to begin with John Wooden. John Wooden won 10 national championships in 12 years, 7 straight national championships. He had an 88 game winning streak, and after that 88 game streak came to a stop, his team turned around and had, I believe it was a 50 plus game winning streak right after that. He was one of the best college basketball coaches of all time. 664 wins, 102 losses. We can argue that the times were, you know, good for him. There were a lot of situations that he didn't have to deal with in the 1960s and 70s that people in, the year 2024 might have to deal with. Nonetheless, he is one of the greatest of all time. And yet, despite the fact that he was dealing with the best athletes of his era, despite the fact that he was recruiting basketball players who were far and above other recruits, his first practice consisted of teaching his players, freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors in college, how to put on socks and how to tie their shoes. It was, in a lot of ways, the same speech each and every time. There were there are YouTube recordings of it. But the fact of the matter is, he, as a person who coached college basketball at a level that was not seen before and really hasn't been seen since, began with the basics. And so many times when we're working on papers in class, we're going to go back to the basics. I think we will avoid the putting on shoes and tying or putting on socks, tying shoes levels, but we're going to go back to the basics sometime. And I think it's important to remember that mastering the basics is often part of mastering success all the way throughout writing. Let's talk about the textbooks. These are listed, I believe, in alphabetical order. Um, Hang the Moon, The Cold Dish, The Many Deaths of Layla Starr, and The Superhero's Journey. The last two are graphic novels or a collection of single issues, and all of them are obviously fiction, and yet we will use them as the basis for the research paper. We will use them to look at ideology, to look at uh, trying to find the ideas underlying people's positions in a paper or in a work. Um, we will be making connections to other classes. Um, and so, yeah, the books are all required. I don't think they're that expensive unless I screwed up someplace. You should be able to get them all for under $50 from Amazon or wherever you find your books. And a lot of them you probably can find, free. Go for it. Those of you who had me last semester, there's going to be a bit of a change this semester. I'm going to try to do everything on Brightspace/D2L. And D2L just fits on the slide a little bit better. But I'm going to try to do everything on Brightspace. For you, there are three things, just as a reminder. Number one, things like the syllabus, the tentative class calendar, the daily writing prompts, the YouTube playlist are all going to be right up front on the Getting Started tab. You only have to click once to get there. All of the assignments are going to be found under the Content tab. The assessments will have uh, things like the Dropbox folder that you'll be submitting your essays to. Your grades obviously will be, that's where you'll go to check those. So those will be the three spots that I think will be most important to you on Brightspace. And so I hope that if you have any questions, you'll talk to me or talk to someone else. And I hope that this saves all of us just a little bit of work. This is just kind of a repeat of what I said before. I don't think there's anything really I need to add here. Basic class period. We'll usually do something where I'm going to ask you to respond, whether it's a one question and one comment format or do some other things. We'll talk about the assigned reading. We'll do a daily writing. Sometimes we'll sample old essays or essays from other sections, and we'll work on revising and editing those. We'll discuss the upcoming assignment. We'll talk about editing and revising and planning and pre-writing or writing strategies in general. This is a composition class. We're going to talk about writing. Specifically, we will probably talk a lot about communication broadly. And we'll talk about the books that we're reading and how they can connect and how we're going to use them for the assignment. Expect to do a daily writing on most days we hold class. I'm still working through how often I'm going to have you submit the daily writings to Brightspace. I think it might be just at once a week on Fridays to get them submitted. But nonetheless, I think it's important here to think about the fact that you'll have to write every day in class. Sometimes the writing will be something that sets up the assignment, the longer essay assignment. Sometimes the writing will be something bizarre, like, for example, I came upon this quotation a year ago. If at first you don't succeed, then skydiving definitely isn't for you. Respond to some quotation like that, but expect to do a daily writing most days we hold class. I believe that writing is thinking, even if it's something bizarre like this quotation, thinking about it, just getting your mind into it. The dates and stuff that I have up here will certainly change. This is just an example from a year ago. As far as grading, major essays are 40% of the final grade, and there's two of them, the research paper and the connection paper. So there's 20% each. The other evaluations, or the writing, however you want to call it, the ideology paper, it might be best to call it a propaganda examination paper, is going to go in at somewhere between 10 and 11%. Same with the cold dish analysis paper, 10 to 11%. 3% for the Hang the Moon evaluation, the cold dish evaluation, and attending the Great Plains Writers Workshop. The research paper, prep, will be the proposal and the annotated bib, 5% of the total grade each. Conferences and workshops, doing the video responses on the days you're not attending and attending prepared to participate. And I haven't decided if I'm going to do just the workshops like I did last semester, or if I'm going to have conferences in the office, or a combination. So however it works out, it'll be 10% of the final grade. And finally, the daily and the random column stuff, the daily writings and the attendance, I think you can look at those as 5% each. Anything else that doesn't fit will probably just fall into a daily writing. The basic percentages, I like the idea of on a paper giving A minuses and B pluses and distinguishing the fact that Some B papers are better than other B papers, or some D papers are close to failing and some aren't. Um, and so this is kind of how it's going to get recorded. Uh, you know, if you have an A, you see a 97, you've gotten the full fledged A. If you see a 75, it's pretty much the basic C. If you're not in class, first of all, I'm not on all of the email lists. So if it's for an extracurricular activity and you want an excused absence, let me know as soon as possible. Send me an email. Let me know as soon as possible. Do the daily writing. Remember, they're posted on the Brightspace page. The slides will be made into a YouTube video. Click on the YouTube playlist and write a comment on that video. There will be a suggested comment on almost all the videos after this one. Write a comment on that video saying that, letting me know that you got to at least half of the video or whatever the comments asking you to do. And remember that absences may reduce your grade, especially on excused absences. On the writing workshops or conferences, if we hold writing workshops, it's 4 or 5 students reporting to class. The list of students who attend each session will be posted on Brightspace. We're going to work together on essays in progress. And if you're not in the classroom, you'll watch a video or slides presentation and do a response. Conferences are going to be held in my office. And if you're not scheduled for a conference on that day, you're going to watch a video or a slides presentation and do a response. My office is in B215A. I'll be there Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. and from 1 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. And my email is leonardcollis@mountmarty.edu. I'm not sure why we have to have full names instead of Leo Collis, but who am I to judge? I just don't like typing extra letters. Let's talk about the big bad on any paper requiring research. You have to give credit where credit is due. You can't steal cars, you can't steal money, you can't steal ideas. You have to acknowledge the source of the intellectual property. And plagiarism is defined as claiming as your own the words, the works, the research of other people. And look, there are several ways to plagiarize. Buying essays from an online essay mill, copying and pasting work that you didn't create. That includes from an AI generator as well. Also, if you didn't clearly indicate the source of an idea that's obviously not your own, that can include leaving out in-text references for a quotation. It can include using a paraphrase that's too close to the original, even if you're citing the source. Just be careful about those. And we'll talk about those in more detail when we get to the research paper proper. Obviously, common knowledge or facts that are available from a wide variety of sources, including introductory textbooks, doesn't need to be cited. For the purposes of this class, the Turnitin tool is going to be used. I reserve the right to use other tools to detect plagiarism or AI usage. In this class, work done by an AI will be considered plagiarism because what AI does is mine the web for ideas and words that it didn't create. And if you're copying and pasting that, you obviously didn't create it either. And if there's an issue, I reserve the right to have an oral quiz over any writing assignment. If you think you determine, you wrote the work, we'll talk it through and go from there. As far as the class goes, I think there's a rubric and there's some maxims that govern class. With apologies to the education department, here's the rubric. CCC T CCC. Character. If we're talking about one of the one of the novels that we're reading, or one of the graphic novels that we're reading, who are the characters? What actions, words, or reactions allow us to discern who they are? And if we're talking about doing the research, who is the author? What are the author's qualifications? Character. Conflict. What are the internal or external struggles that motivate the character's actions in Hang the Moon, or The Cold Dish, or The Many Deaths of Layla Starr, or The Superhero's Journey? If we're doing the research, what arguments are the sources being used for the research trying to answer? A man named Stephen Protho, writes about religion, it says that the difference between Christianity and Buddhism and Judaism and Islam are the questions they're trying to answer. Christianity, according to Prothero, is looking at sin. Buddhism is looking at suffering. Is the research you're using making arguments about the question you too are trying to answer? If not, maybe we have to find other articles, other authors, other research to support the point you need to make. Connection. How does the work connect to us personally? And I can just do a quick thing here, make sure that you proofread better than I do, and make sure that you understand there's a difference between yous and us. There's going to be a whole paper talk where you're going to make a connection between one of the works we read in class and other classes that you're taking, and how the ideas and the themes connect. And sometimes connection, I think, might be tangential. There might be a bit of conflict, but I don't think it necessarily has to be contradictory. The same with the research connecting to the topic selected for the research paper, and the points that you want to make sure that they're making the same points. If I can look at the pictures, it seems to me that the puzzle pieces are trying to be forced just a tad. And I think when you're trying to make the connection, it should be one continuous piece that lets you tie everything up. And so when we make the connection, we're going to be looking for a way to have one continuous piece to tie everything together instead of trying to force it. Theme. What's the observation the author of the 4 books we're reading in class, what the observation is being made about the world humans inhabit? What presuppositions are the authors of the research making? And what point is the author making? Again, is the point the author making something that you're going to refute directly, something that supports your point? Think through about the theme, the underlying meaning, the main ideas that the author is trying to get across on your research, and how you can use that. And again, don't try to force something that doesn't fit. As far as writing proper, I believe the 3 C's are concise, cogent, and coherent. Brief but comprehensive. You'll hear me say short, not shallow quite a bit. I believe that's the same thing. Is it well reasoned and supported by evidence? It's cogent. Does it flow smoothly and make sense? It's coherent. It should not be a Rorschach test. It should not be an ink blot where you see a lot of ink spilled on the paper, which would indicate too many words, too spread out to be cogent, too confusing to be coherent. Finally, let's look at maxims. Maxim is a short, pithy statement expressing a general truth or rule of conduct. For this class, I have several. Don't attribute to malice that which can be attributed to ignorance. I may say something that angers you, Another student may say something that angers you. Um, you may write a paper about your grandmother and I give you a C. That doesn't mean I hate your grandmother. Don't attribute to malice that which can be attributed to ignorance. When we have a group of people together, we all don't know what triggers other people. Don't take dull for an answer. I think this is important because one of the things that has always frustrated me is people assume that a comment like, I agree with what she said, is somehow moving the conversation along. Explain why. Don't just repeat what someone else says. Add on, develop, move the conversation forward. Everything's an argument. Even if it's just, I'm worth listening to. When we write a narrative, that's an argument. The idea that an argument often requires a response means even conversations about the weather, where two people agree that it's sunny or snowy or cloudy, is still an argument. Omit needless words, goes back to being concise. Readers can write better than those who claim to be natural BSers. The more you know, the more you can read, the more you can add to things, I think the better off you are. So we're reading 4 different books. Even if you think fiction has no place in your life at the moment, the idea of reading, I think, helps people put words together, put thoughts together. I think reading is a form of thinking. I think writing is a form of thinking. Short, not shallow. I think that goes back to the concise. I think that goes back to the cogent. I think that goes back to the coherent. And finally, we're in a college classroom. We come from all sorts of different points of views. And I think in the past 10 years, we have all sorts of people who post stuff on social media to the effect of, I will trust gas stations, sushi before I trust. And then there's a whole list of institutions or a whole list of people that won't be trusted. Experts are indeed fallible, but that does not mean that non-experts are infallible. And for a college classroom and for research, we're going to operate under the maxim that even if they're fallible, we prefer them over the non-experts who are equally fallible. And finally, I want to make just a few random comments about listening. I think listening is difficult. And I think we have reached a stage in the United States where people have forgotten how to listen. And people, I think, often spend more time wanting to talk over somebody rather than listening what somebody is saying. And I think people spend a lot of time hearing what they consider a buzzword and assuming that what follows next is going to fit their preconceived notion of what that buzzword means. And they're just going to keep moving through and respond to something that may or may not have been said or may not have been implied. I think listening is an important element of thinking. I think listening to try to understand where the other side is coming from rather than trying to listen to automatically argue is an important part of learning to become an educated human being. And so, whether we're talking about a book you disagree with, whether you're reading research you disagree with, always think about what can be learned from this and what's the best way to respond to this, with the underlying view that anger, frustration is probably not the best way to respond. I think I'll wrap this up here. I hope to see you in class next class period. Hope you have a good day.